Honourable members, please remain standing for the playing of God Save the Queen.
God save our gracious Queen, long live our noble Queen. God save the Queen. Send her victorious, happy and glorious, long to reign over us. God save the Queen.
Honourable members, please be seated.
Introduction of visitors. Introduction of guests.
Honourable members, we have a number of guests joining us today. First and foremost, we have the mother of the honourable member for Calgary-Pagan, Ms. Josie Furr. We also have in the Speakers Gallery, Samantha Peck. In the Members Gallery, I believe a guest of the honourable member for Central Peace Notley, Samantha Steinke, and perhaps most importantly, we have Speaker's mom, my mom, Ms. Mary Cooper. Please rise and receive the warm welcome of the Assembly.
Ministerial statements. Member statements.
The honourable member for Edmonton, Highlands, Norwood has a statement to make.
Albertans got a good look at the decision makers of their government last week, and they got a good look at who their premier really is. A far cry from the everyday Albertan image he tried to convey, sleeves rolled up in his blue pickup truck. Instead, Albertans saw him and three of his liquor cabinet buddies sipping whiskey and multiple bottles of wine, surrounded by white linen, but not a thought or care about the rules they insist others follow. So who is the liquor cabinet? It seems only appropriate to me that we take the time to meet this cast of characters. First, we have the Premier, who thought that this critical government meeting could only be improved with the addition of a 40 of Jameson's. The Premier, who lectures Albertans about the importance of following the rules, only to watch his MLAs and staff travel abroad, throw a boozy patio party with no distancing, who knows what else. Then there is the Health Minister, who on a Thursday yells in this chamber about how there were no rules broken, only to feign an apology on a Monday. The Health Minister who fought doctors during a pandemic, who thinks that our health system has 11,000 too many heroes working in it, all of whom he plans to fire when the pandemic is over, by the way. Next, the Environment Minister, who shuts down this House to let the Premier escape his caucus troubles. The Environment Minister, who thinks we've got a couple too many gorgeous mountains in the eastern slopes and not nearly enough coal mines. The Environment Minister, who tried to sell off our parks without asking us, and now, to make up for his mistake, he's adding on fees just to make parks less accessible for us all. And last but not least, the Finance Minister, currently on a 6th credit downgrade. He lost billions on a failed pipeline, couldn't find billions in his last Auditor General report, and continues to side with profitable insurance companies over the people he's supposed to serve. This, my friends, is the heart and soul of this government, the dream team of this Premier, the best the UCP has to offer. And while this team of patio partying politicians is the best the UCP can do, I know that Alberta deserves better, and come the next election, Alberta will have better.
Yeah. The honourable member for Calgary-Pagan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, today, Alberta has moved to Stage 2 of the 3-stage Open for Summer plan. Alberta is taking a significant step towards safely returning to normal as fitness centres, libraries and movie theatres reopen. Large outdoor gatherings resume, all with public health restrictions in place. In addition, outdoor social gatherings, weddings, and funeral services can now increase to 20 people. Retail services and places of worship are permitted to have 1/3 of fire code occupancy. We've said that vaccines are our ticket out of this pandemic. Albertans have embraced the vaccine, and the evidence clearly shows they work and are safe. Today, 67.2% of all Albertans over the age of 12 have their first dose. I encourage Albertans who have yet to get their first dose to consider it, as it will bring Alberta to stage 3 of our Open for Summer plan. Today, we are one step closer to returning to normal. Stage 3 is expected to begin in late June or early July. Requirements for stage 3 are 2 weeks after 70% of Albertans aged 12 years or older, born in 2009 or earlier, have received at least one dose. This entirely depends on all Albertans continuing to get vaccinated and following the public health measures in place. The province's dedicated residents have stepped up following public health measures and getting vaccinated in record numbers. Let's continue this path to ensure that the worst is definitely behind us and we can have one of the best and most anticipated Alberta summers. Brighter days are truly ahead. Thank you.
The honourable member for Calgary-Falconridge has the call.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Recently, the City of Calgary released their stakeholder report on flyovers at 64th and 80th Avenue Northeast. After reading the report, I am deeply concerned. First off, the first page indicates the 64th Avenue flyover was not even considered in the original area structure plan. Yet, through the lobbying efforts of special interests, Council decided that traffic could not be accommodated sufficiently by one flyover at 80th Avenue Northeast. Why would Council push for such a short-sighted project that would have numerous ramifications for surrounding communities in Calgary Northeast? That is the question I continue to ask myself as I read the report, because it shows gross indifference to the residents and a lack of common sense. Does Council not realize that the communities already have access to Stony Trail at 96th Avenue and McKnight Boulevard Northeast, both of which are within less than a couple meters from each other and already offer access to Stony Trail within minutes of leaving their communities? But this is not only the concern I have it. The city conducted survey to receive feedback from those who concerned. If you look at the survey results, the question was skewed. In the question 2, survey asked, what are the benefits you see from this future connection? This is clearly a biased question, as it assumes the benefits are undisputed. Despite that bias, however, overwhelming response was the 64th Avenue flyover is a waste of taxpayers' money, as 2 flyovers already exist at 96th and McKnight Boulevard. Mr. Speaker, residents of Calgary Northeast do not want a 64th Avenue flyover. They want to keep the integrity of Manmeet Puller, and I'll continue to fight for my constituents. They deserve to enjoy their communities specifically. Thank you.
The honourable member for Edmonton, Beverly Clareview has a statement to make.
Yesterday, through albertasfuture.ca, we held a consultation on sustainability and the economic future of rural Alberta. We had participants from all across the province identifying multiple issues facing rural Albertans and sharing their ideas on how we can help rural communities become more sustainable for generations to come. One example is Kathy, who shared her struggle with reliable transportation. She needs to travel long distances for treatment and to access other essential services. With the cuts to rural transportation, it takes her a full day to travel to and from her treatment. Kathy's considering moving out of her hometown to live somewhere closer to the services she needs, and she is not alone. Many Albertans have made the tough decision to move. It's heartbreaking that Albertans are forced out of their homes and the communities they grew up in just because they don't have a safe and reliable transportation to the services they need. Another participant, Jake, highlighted how investing in diversification projects will benefit rural communities. He shared his ideas on how rural Alberta can benefit from geothermal and lithium development, and how those projects will bring great-paying, long-lasting jobs to his community. Brad pointed out that main streets across Alberta are under threat of losing numerous small businesses within the next 5 to 10 years. Currently, the majority of small businesses in rural Alberta are owned by boomers who are soon to retire. With decreasing revenues, not enough Albertans are willing to take the risk to buy the businesses. We'll be seeing more shops closing for good. And when these businesses close, these jobs are gone as well. It's clear that rural Albertans not only know the issues they are facing, but also the solutions that will help us all get through this economic recession. So please visit albertasfuture.ca to let us know what you think about rural Alberta. And I can promise you, Should we form government in 2023 or sooner, we'll continue to work with rural Albertans to build a better path forward for our province to build a future where we can all benefit. Thank you.
The honourable member for Calgary North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to thank Albertans for doing their part in bending the curve and slowing the spread of COVID-19. Doctors, nurses, clinical staff, police, firefighters, teachers, grocery and retail workers, skilled trade workers and professionals, restaurant owners, wellness service workers, and of course, entrepreneurs have felt the impact of the public health orders but have persevered. Their hard work and commitment have helped us carry through these past 15 months, and I could not be more grateful. Small businesses are the heart of our communities, and supporting them by shopping local is so important. So this summer, I encourage all of you to visit your local farmers market, food trucks, and local artisans. Our government recognizes the importance of supporting Alberta businesses and every working Albertan. That's why we have created the Jobs Now program, which will invest up to $370 million to encourage employers to hire and train new employees. It has become clear that vaccinations are our key to getting back to normal. I myself received the jab in May. I'm eagerly looking forward to my second dose. Today, we move into step 2 of our Open for Business plan, and we see things like outdoor gathering limits increase, restaurants open for 6 people per table, indoor recreations open, and youth activities take place. I am proud and humbled by the efforts made by my neighbors, friends, and colleagues. Thanks to your sacrifice, we will enjoy a truly great summer. I feel lucky to be a member of this legislature and a representative of such selfless and tenacious people who truly represent the can-do Alberta spirit. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for St. Albert is next.
He was a newlywed. He'd been a professional boxer, but a blow to the head changed his life. She was a new university graduate, a lover of nature, and a much-loved daughter. When her vehicle was struck from behind, her life changed immediately. He'd had a difficult life, battling substance abuse and a lifetime of pain. He tried to end that with a gunshot to his head, and he survived. She'd been happily married for years, and together she and her husband operated a successful plumbing company, but a stroke changed that. These Albertans have one thing in common. They are survivors of traumatic brain injury. In Canada, one person sustains a traumatic brain injury every 3 minutes. According to available statistics, traumatic brain injuries are now the leading cause of disability worldwide. Brain injuries are acquired after falls, blows, motor vehicle accidents, assaults, sports injuries, tumors, strokes, and firearms. It's estimated that 50% of Canadians who are houseless or in unstable housing have brain injury. 92% of intimate partner violence incidents include blows to the head, face, and strangulation, causes of traumatic brain injury. Brain injury survivors describe themselves as having invisible disabilities. It's almost impossible to understand the extent of relearning and rehabilitation that must happen for survivors to be able to recover even the most basic motor skills. Memory, cognition, and the regulation of emotions are lifelong challenges, coupled with new realities like depression, chronic pain, confusion, and fatigue, not to mention unemployment, loss of relationships, and poverty. This UCP government has continued to systematically reduce supports for survivors who rely on income support, homeless supports, and rehab. Programs all over Alberta that support survivors are unable to meet the demand due to insufficient funding. June is Brain Injury Awareness Month. Awareness is important. Appropriate supports are vital. Lives depend on it.
The honourable member for Calgary Klein.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. For 60 years, spring meant gymnasiums would be buzzing with science fair activity. The pandemic canceled most of the fairs in 2020, but this year's science fairs in Alberta were prepared and they moved online. It was a challenge for these volunteer-run events to adapt to online platforms, to accept registrations, conduct judging, recognize the winners, but Alberta ingenuity ruled. Alberta's regional science fairs have wrapped up, and I would like to congratulate the students and organizers for making these virtual events possible. In Calgary, there is normally 1,000 students from grade 5s through 12 from hundreds of different schools participating on 700 projects. This year, there were 363 projects, and they were available online for you to view. The not-for-profit research organization Genome Alberta has been a sponsor of the fairs for 15 years and maintained financial support throughout the pandemic. They extended support to the fairs that had to be cancelled last year to ensure that they had the funds to be able to move online this year. Developing a science fair project makes young people producers of knowledge. Students who take on a science fair project are in charge of their own learning and research. Real-world problems, such as what impact climate change will have on the lentil production, which was an award winner at the Lethbridge Regional Science Fair, or the gene editing, is it the future, which earned Genome Alberta Intermediate Award for Mohit Krishnar Shikar from Fairview School. And we should mention the creatively titled Why Do We Hiccup, which won a Best Life Sciences Award for twin sisters Mayal and Reese Gallant, who attend Ridgeview Central School in the Crete. 42 projects went on to the Canada-wide Science Fair, which ran online from May 17th to 21st. One project from Calgary and one from Edmonton won gold at the national event, and 17 received silver and bronze medals. I would like to offer my thanks to all the students, parents, teachers, and volunteers who made science fairs possible.
The Honourable Member for Drayton Valley Devon has a statement.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. One of the things that comes with being a province abundant in energy, particularly oil, is the need to make sure that the environment is protected. This is necessary not only during the extraction process, but we must also ensure that the land is rehabilitated when we are finished. As a province, we've relied on companies that have done the extracting to fulfill this obligation, especially when it comes to cleaning up afterwards. And this has been done effectively much of the time, and we've been awarded with some of the best land reclamation innovation in the world. However, some bad actors have left the need for us to modify the programs in place that govern reclamation. Just recently, the Alberta Energy Regulator spent several months drafting a new liability management framework and have now placed it on their website. They are now inviting stakeholders to provide feedback over the coming month. Under this framework, industry is required to spend a certain amount every year on reclamation efforts, with specific lists of what is and is not eligible towards the spending targets. This amount will increase proportionately every year. What is proposed is mandatory closure payment regimes that will ensure companies allocate money towards well closures. Next year, in 2022, industry will be required to spend $422 million on efforts that include remediation work on inactive sites, reclamation site work, equipment removal on inactive sites, facility abandonment work, and more. Targets for the coming year will be available by July 31st of every year, and individual licensees are encouraged to spend more on reclamation if they are able to. Final details will be released this fall once industry feedback has been received and the draft is finalized. I'm proud that the Minister of Energy is working to revise the regulations that govern well reclamation here in Alberta.
The Honourable Member for Cypress Medicine Hat.
I rise to ask a simple favour of my friends and colleagues assembled today. Please join me in taking a quick look around us. The mace, the stained glass, the columns, even the galleries. This is a special place, Mr. Speaker. This is the beating heart of our living democracy. The voice of history echoes in these halls. Yet, in the name of desperate politics, we have too often taken this place for granted. Increasingly, this chamber has been transformed into a stage, with actors repeating their lines to appease a director barking orders in the background. This is my first member statement as an independent MLA, and I wanted to take this opportunity to speak about why we are here. We are here to represent the interests of the families and communities in our constituencies. We are also here to pursue their vision for our province. When we stray too far from either of these priorities, I believe we are negligent in our duties. Here's a vision I think most of us can get behind. An Alberta, strong and free, where hard work and dedication bring new hope and new opportunity. Let us work to make our province the most prosperous and free jurisdiction in North America, strengthened by free choice and competition, where government trusts you to make the right choices for yourself, your family, and your community. Let us build a province that puts Albertans first. Let us work towards lessening the tax and regulatory burden on all members of this great province. Let us renew our sense of purpose so we can craft a future of our own making. Folks, 2 years ago, Albertans thought they elected a government dedicated to such ideals. That was before the scandals, before the arrogance, that was before the entitlement. We have a duty to those who elected us to give them the government they voted for, to pursue freedom, equity, and opportunity for all Albertans.
Honourable members, the time is 1:50, and that makes it oral question period. And the honourable member for Edmonton-Glenora has the call.
Quote, Albertans have every right to expect that people in positions of public trust be held to a higher standard of conduct during COVID-19. Those were the Premier's words. During this pandemic, it is essential that leaders follow the rules. Sadly, the Premier and his liquor cabinet dined illegally on the patio of the Sky Palace. That was one time that the Premier was caught breaking the rules, and Albertans were rightfully outraged. Can the Premier stand and state categorically that no one from his staff, cabinet, caucus, not his House leader, ate indoors in a restaurant when it was illegal to do so during the pandemic?
The Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I can certainly be clear that I have not eaten in a restaurant when it was illegal to do so during the pandemic, Mr. Speaker, and the Premier has addressed unfortunate, recent, untrue rumors that have been spread about him, Mr. Speaker, just recently. I'll let those comments stand, Mr. Speaker. But what you're seeing, the opening question and question period today, from the official opposition about that, just proves the point. Nothing to do with government business. Why is that, Mr. Speaker? Because they want to avoid the fact that today is a great day in Alberta, Mr. Speaker, as we move to phase 2 to get our province open, Mr. Speaker. So instead, what I'd rather say through you to Albertans, thank you for getting us here. Let's get going.
The honourable member for Edmonton-Glenora.
Entitlement and integrity are absolutely what the government should be known for, not breaking the rules. And we don't know what happened, but we do know that Albertans don't trust this Premier. When asked about breaking the public health measures by having multiple people from multiple households drinking liters of wine and a 40 of Jameson on the Sky Palace patio, the Premier tried to brush it off. He said, quote, we had a meeting planned for government planning purposes. I decided to do it more safely outdoors. He later admitted that he broke the rules when he faced major backlash from Albertans and his own caucus. So will the Premier now tell this House how many illegal dinners he's had in the Sky Palace or anywhere else?
The Honourable the Minister of Health is risen.
Mr. Speaker, this is the NDP trying to, they've obviously been spending way too much of their time and their resources and their attention reading alt-right blogs rather than spending time on Albertans and focusing on lives and livelihoods as we are, Mr. Speaker. Now, we have answered the question, Mr. Speaker, that there was an outdoor social gathering, and unfortunately not at all times. During that time, did we keep 2 meters apart is something that we have apologized for, we continue to apologize for, and we will continue to hold ourselves to a higher account in trying to show a better example to Albertans.
Member for Edmonton-Glenora.
The Premier told Albertans not to believe the photos that he saw of his liquor cabinet meeting and mocked those upset by his inner circle breaking the rules. Now Albertans are tired of this Premier gaslighting and his insincere apologies. So will the Premier commit that if anyone in his cabinet, caucus, or staff is caught violating the rules, for example, dining at a restaurant while restaurants are closed, that he will not hesitate, that he will fire them immediately?
The Honourable the Minister of Health.
Speaker, that hasn't happened. But this is, again, the NDP spending their attention, spending their time on alt-right blogs and lies that have been told about Premier that he's already responded to, Mr. Speaker. And by the way, blogs that have also inspired and encouraged attacks on our public health inspectors that have tried to protect Alberta, tried to protect Albertans throughout the pandemic. And the NDP are giving more attention to websites like that, more attention to the people who would attack the people that we should be congratulating and thanking instead.
The Honourable Member for Calgary-Buffalo.
In the last election, this government made big promises of jobs, economy, and pipelines. It was splashed across every podium the Premier stood behind for a year. But to date, they have not delivered on a single promise. Just yesterday, TC Energy announced they are formally cancelling Keystone XL project. And despite the Premier's promise that Albertans' money was safe, that clearly isn't true. Albertans are now on the hook for $1.3 billion. Why did the Premier tell Albertans they wouldn't be on the hook for any money when they are now stuck with a $1.3 billion bill and nothing to show for it?
Well, the Minister of Finance and the President of Treasury Board has risen.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. We did commit to delivering on pipelines, and Mr. Speaker, we made a calculated decision around investing in the KXL pipeline, a pipeline that would have provided $30 billion of wealth creation for Albertans over the next 20 years. And Mr. Speaker, we've been transparent with the process since the President canceled the permit. We've stated that our exposure was not materially more than $1.3 billion. That remains so today.
Honourable member for Calgary-Buffalo.
UCP gambled wrong. TMX is going through, Mr. Speaker. KXL is cancelled. Yesterday's loss is another example of how this Premier has failed our energy sector, from their embarrassing war room to their overdue and over-budget inquiry and their massive failure to create jobs. Now this mismanagement with the KXL file has cost the people of Alberta $1.3 billion. The Premier promised new pipelines. That hasn't happened. The Premier promised no money was at risk. That's not true. The Premier promised jobs from his failed energy strategy. That's definitely not true. Does the Premier understand, given all those failures, while Albertans no longer trust him and no longer trust his government's bogus...
The Honourable the Minister of Energy.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I really wish the NDP would spend as much time defending the energy sector and the men and women who work in it as they spend attacking everyone, anyone, and anything that stands up for the energy sector. Mr. Speaker, on this side of the House, our entire caucus every day supports the energy sector. And Mr. Speaker, we're proud of it. Mr. Speaker, we're seeing progress on pipelines from TMX. We saw Pembina Pipeline announce yesterday that they want to work with the Western Indigenous Pipeline Group to purchase that pipeline.
The Honourable member for Calgary-Buffalo.
We committed to 50,000 barrels a day on KXL, Mr. Speaker. After the Premier announced he had committed billions of dollars of Albertans' money, we asked for the details of the KXL deal to be released. Unfortunately, he refused to shed any light on that deal. For months, he hid behind confidentiality. He said that the deal was in place, that the details couldn't be released due to commercial sensitivity. But now the deal is over and the government has reached an exit strategy. Will the Premier release all of the documents related to the deal? If he really stands behind this deal, he should have nothing to hide. Release the documents today, Premier. What are you hiding?
The Honourable the Minister of Energy.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. There's full transparency. We've said right from the very beginning that there's full transparency on this deal. And Mr. Speaker, in this province, we produce about over 3 million barrels a day of oil from the oil sands alone. If prices go down because we don't have enough pipeline capacity, we can lose hundreds of millions of dollars in provincial revenue and hundreds of thousands of jobs across the country. The reality is, Mr. Speaker, we supported this pipeline because we believe it would have brought higher prices for Alberta oil, increased oil sands production, and brought us $30 billion a year in royalties.
The Honourable member for Edmonton-Beverly-Clareview.
Today in Calgary, our leader presented ideas to advance opportunities in bitumen beyond combustion. These ideas will create more value-added products without downstream emissions. Our government put Alberta on a good path by starting a program at Alberta Innovates and setting up the partial upgrading program. We know that setting up our industry for success could help make Alberta a leader in several multi-billion-dollar markets. Unfortunately, this is not even mentioned in the government's so-called recovery plan, and the government is doing nothing on this file. Why is the government ignoring this big opportunity for our energy industry?
The Honourable Minister of Energy is risen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I can say very confidently that we have confidence and we're very optimistic about the future of the oil sands. And Mr. Speaker, that's because the fundamentals are solid. There's markets for it. The oil sands have committed to becoming net zero. That means they're going to be low carbon as well as low cost and low risk. In addition, Mr. Speaker, we know that there's many uses for heavy oil, including solidified bitumen, things like Bitcrude. We know that bitumen beyond combustion gives a use for the product. Mr. Speaker, I'm very optimistic about the future of the oil sands.
The Honourable member for Edmonton-Beverly-Clareview.
Then why isn't it mentioned in your plan? We've heard from several experts that partial upgrading is key to enabling these new products. When coming to office, the government cancelled the program, saying it was too risky. Too risky from this government? Didn't they just cost Albertans $1.3 billion on a bet that Donald Trump would win the White House? Yep. Partial upgrading is critical to our future. Failed bids on pipelines to nowhere is not. Will anyone on the other side do the right thing, stand up, apologize to Albertans for wasting their money, and then reinstate a partial upgrading program that will actually create jobs?
The Honourable the Minister of Energy.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. We're very proud of the work and the expansions, the growth in our oil and gas sector. Mr. Speaker, since the pandemic hit last year with price collapse and in the midst of the largest pandemic, We understand that production has fully recovered. Price is sitting at $70 a barrel, Mr. Speaker. The fundamentals are very strong. Of course, we support upgrading in Alberta, market-based upgrading, but there's got to be a competitive reason for it. We need to see the private sector move forward, and Mr. Speaker, we're very optimistic about the oil and gas sector.
Warren Chung, president of Well Resources, joined us today to push for more government support and partial upgrading in non-combustion bitumen production. Warren said, quote, Albertans have the knowledge, the willpower, and given the right legislative framework, there'll be tremendous incentive to meet our climate action targets, end quote. The evidence is clear that we can support areas like this to draw billions in investment and create tens of thousands of jobs. Can the Premier commit today to closing his bogus war room, ending his embarrassing inquiry, and to developing a real strategy for energy to transform Alberta? Premier, your once touted fight-back strategy is an absolute joke, and
The Honourable the Minister of Energy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Again, as I said in a previous comment, I wish the NDP would spend as much time supporting our energy sector as they do attacking those who are standing up for it. Mr. Speaker, let me talk about the history of pipelines and where we're in a situation where for 5 years, Mr. Speaker, starting in 2015 to about 2019, every single pipeline project that was proceeding either got vetoed, it got cancelled by the project proponent for lack of government support, including lack of government support from the NDP government. It was a total catastrophic failure in supporting pipelines from that government.
The Honourable Member for Edmonton Riverview is next.
The illegal drugs circulating in Alberta right now are incredibly toxic, and they are killing more than 4 Albertans every single day. The province has reported the deadliest January, the deadliest February, and the deadliest March on record. We know things are only getting worse. This government's response has been utterly inadequate. Yesterday, they announced 2 small expansions to existing programs that only operate in Edmonton. To the Premier, why are you doing so little when this crisis is killing so many Albertans?
Minister of Health.
Well, nothing could be further from the truth, Mr. Speaker. In fact, while we continue to provide harm reduction services like supervised consumption sites in both Edmonton and Calgary, as well as throughout the province, what we're doing is also adding a focus to recovery and integrating consumption service sites with the health system so that those who are in need of help, those who are suffering from addiction, can get tied into the opportunities for recovery, tied into other opportunities in the healthcare system that they need and that they deserve.
Member for Edmonton Riverview.
The Premier's response will be judged by lives lost, not by dollars spent. He is failing Albertans. There are proven methods that have saved lives in Alberta, across Canada, and around the world, which the Premier opposes. And the government's own advisors are telling the minister that supervised consumption services save lives. Will the Premier put his prejudice aside and immediately, urgently expand access to supervised consumption in communities across Alberta?
The Honourable the Minister of Health.
Well, that's why, Mr. Speaker, we expanded services in Calgary. And not only that, we're also having and passing quality standards so that we can have quality standards. And it's really weird, quite frankly, Mr. Speaker, to hear the NDP opposing quality standards for consumption services. That they would oppose the opportunities that we could have to integrate consumption services and have the quality standards, but also to integrate them with the healthcare system to make sure that not only do we have consumption services in places throughout the province, but also to integrate it with the healthcare system to make sure that people who suffer from addiction get the care that they need.
The Honourable Member.
Other Canadian provinces have saved lives by replacing illegal and toxic street drugs with legal and regulated pharmaceutical medication. Like most jurisdictions, Alberta has been doing some of this for many years by offering methadone through the opioid dependency program. And since the Premier and his liquor cabinet have access to a safe and legal supply of the drug of their choice, will the Premier commit to a safe supply program to save Albertans' lives from the toxic illegal drug supply?
Minister of Health.
Well, Mr. Speaker, while I have an opportunity, I'd also like to point out that while throughout the world, during COVID, it unfortunately did make the opioid crisis more difficult for every jurisdiction to deal with. But we have seen the benefits of our approach to not just having harm reduction services, but also adding a focus to recovery. And the opportunities for recovery has helped us, even more than other provinces have, bring down the severe outcomes that are related to the opioid crisis. So it's showing the numbers that this added focus to recovery is working here in Alberta.
The order, the honourable member for Fort Saskatchewan-Vegreville has the call.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yesterday, the Premier was part of an announcement with one of the largest hydrogen producers in the world. This project is in the industrial heartland and will be of benefit to my constituents of Fort Saskatchewan-Vegreville. Yep. Air Products is building a new hydrogen facility, and it will produce 30 tons per day of liquid hydrogen and a 1.2 million ton per year carbon capture facility. What can the Minister of Finance tell us about this project, and how many jobs will the facility create?
The Honourable Minister of Finance and the President of Treasury Board.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to the member for the question. The Air Products announcement is very exciting for our province, representing $1.3 billion in investment. This project, which will be operational in 2024, will use Alberta natural gas, support our upstream energy industry, further strengthen our ESG narrative, and create 2,500 jobs.
Member for Fort Saskatchewan-Vegreville.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Minister. Hydrogen has an exciting future in my riding and in this province. Alberta's industrial heartland is a true economic engine for Alberta and Canada, representing thousands of jobs. Projects like Air Products are cutting-edge global energy facilities that are leading the way to new technologies and emissions reduction. Can the Minister of Finance tell the House what new technologies are involved in this project?
The Honourable the Minister of Finance, President of Treasury Board.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. The 30-ton per day hydrogen liquefaction facility is the first of such liquid hydrogen operations around the world, and a power generation facility fueled 100% by hydrogen. The Air Products facility will be a net zero complex that will utilize carbon capture operations capable of achieving 95% removal of CO2 from the complex. The CO2 will be permanently sequestered by leveraging the Wolf Carbon Solutions Alberta Carbon Trunk Line.
The Honourable Member for Fort Saskatchewan-Vegreville.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Minister. This is one of many new investments in the province that were assisted by Invest Alberta Corporation, a new Crown agency that our government established to attract high-value investment in Alberta. We've seen investments in technology, artificial intelligence, quantum computing, and now hydrogen. Can the Minister of Finance tell the House what the total job impact of investments were from Invest Alberta?
The Minister.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and again, thank you to the member for the question. Invest Alberta has been instrumental in attracting a number of high-value investments since they were created last summer. We've seen mCloud, which will create 200 jobs, Infosys, which will create 500 jobs, and potentially as many as 2,500, Emphasis, which will create up to 1,000 jobs, and now Air Products, which will create 2,500 jobs. Mr. Speaker, I also want to note that the President of Air Products stated that the project came to the region and province due to the relentless advocacy of the Premier of this province. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to thank the Premier for his relentless advocacy.
The Honourable Member for Edmonton Northwest.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The federal government announced $121 million for post-secondary Francophone institutions in a minority setting. This money would go a long way to help Alberta's Campus Saint-Jean, which has cut nearly a quarter of its courses last year because of consistent underfunding from this UCP government. The future of Campus Saint-Jean is in question as a result. In order to access this federal money, Mr. Speaker, the provincial government must match the investment from the federal government. So I would ask the minister to explain to Alberta's Francophone community here and now whether he will match the federal funding and help save.
The Honourable Minister of Advanced Education.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm happy to provide some explanation. I'm sure, as the member opposite knows, the government of Alberta does not provide funding directly to the campus. The government of Alberta provides funding to the University of Alberta, and we respect board autonomy and independence in decision-making, and we entrust the leadership at the University of Alberta to make appropriate decisions with the resources. And we'll continue to allow them to do that. I know the members opposite prefer to meddle and micromanage into the affairs of our post-secondary institutions, but we believe that their autonomy and independence is
the Honourable Member for Edmonton Northwest.
Well, Mr. Speaker, given that we learned that the dollars that Campus Saint-Jean could receive from the federal investment would be about $4 million, which would help to cover their operational costs for quite a long time. And given that this UCP government has a very bad habit of leaving federal money on the table for reasons that they could only explain themselves, I suppose, given I think that We need this minister now to explain why he continues to ruin post-secondary schools, including Campus Saint-Jean, at the time that we need them the most.
The Honourable Minister of Advanced Education.
Well, naturally, I agree with probably 99.9% of everything that was just said, Mr. Speaker. Just to point out and provide some additional information for members, according to figures from 2017-18 from Stats Canada, the University of Alberta received $18,000 per student in operating funding. The national average for the U15 is $11,700. And furthermore, we have just finalized Alberta 2030, which for the first time in 15 years is a strategic plan to strengthen and grow our post-secondary.
The Honourable Member. Put him at the bottom.
Well, Mr. Speaker, given that Alberta's French-speaking population is growing, we have more than 6,500 students directly in French education, and given rather than investing in the students and their future, this UCP government decided to blow out $1.3 billion on a failed bet on Donald Trump. Will the minister explain why his government is so bad at making investment decisions? He sits on a cabinet that continues to double down on the Premier's failed economic strategy. It's not working. Put the money forward. We need it for Francophone education.
The Honourable Member, Minister of Advanced Education.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. We're making very strategic investments in areas to maximize return. We've provided $6 million in funding to Careers the Next Generation to quadruple the number of high school students that are involved in apprenticeship programming. We've provided $10 million over 4 years to Women Building Futures to help more women pursue successful careers in the trades. We've created new scholarships to help women enter STEM-related fields, as well as to encourage more individuals to pursue careers in trades and apprenticeship education. And there's more to say. As I mentioned, we've just unveiled a 10-year strategy that will guide our efforts in the future.
The member for Calgary McCall is next.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Next week marks the one-year anniversary of the hailstorm that hit northeast Calgary. It was one of the costliest natural disasters in Canadian history, but a year later, many residents in northeast Calgary still don't have their homes repaired. They went through an entire winter with boarded-up windows, holes in their siding and roofs, while also struggling through the COVID-19 pandemic. Simple question: when will this government finally act to help these residents?
The Honourable Minister of Finance, President of Treasury Board.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. In this province, we get bad hailstorms, and that was a particularly tough hailstorm last year in northeast Calgary. And Mr. Speaker, I've reached out to the insurance industry, to insurance companies, to ensure that they're adjudicating claims on a timely basis and in the most appropriate way possible. Mr. Speaker, we've had Calgary MLAs work with their constituents, working through claims. I can say the vast majority of those claims have been settled. We know there's a few outstanding. Mr. Speaker, we'll continue to advocate.
The Honourable Member for Calgary McCall.
Given that a year has gone by without any help from this UCP government, despite the Premier saying he would make some calls and apply some pressure on the insurance companies, and given that he also said, and I quote, "We will read the riot act to those companies," end quote. Did the Premier call those companies? If so, why didn't they listen and move faster? I thought the Premier had friends in the insurance industry. He sure does them a lot of favors.
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Again, the hailstorm in northeast Calgary was a very, very significant storm. There was material loss experienced by many residents. And Mr. Speaker, that's why we've been reaching out to the insurance industry again to ensure that they're adjudicating claims expeditiously and fairly. And Mr. Speaker, again, Calgary MLAs, I expect on both sides of the House, are continuing to work with their constituents, ensuring that they can get through the claims process. Mr. Speaker, we hope we're going to get there very soon.
Honourable Member for Calgary McCall.
Given that the UCP government gave $147 million from the disaster recovery program to Fort McMurray for May 2020 flood damages, an insurable event covered by 13 insurers in Alberta, which was the right thing to do, and given that the UCP gave $0 to Northeast Calgary for June 13 hailstorm damages, insisting that disaster recovery program is not for insurable event, will the Premier apologize for ignoring Northeast Calgary and for this differential treatment of Northeast Calgary and do something to support them and protect them from next hailstorm.
The Honourable Minister.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Again, we have, in this province of Alberta, we have very damaging hailstorms every year. And Mr. Speaker, Albertans typically take insurance to protect from losses of those hailstorms. And on insurable losses, residents need to go, property owners need to go to their insurance agents. Mr. Speaker, that's why we've reached out to insurance companies to press them to ensure they're adjudicating claims expeditiously, appropriately. Mr. Speaker, we'll continue to do that.
The Honourable Member for Central Peace Notley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Premier, it's been a difficult time for Albertans. After the patio gathering at the federal building, Albertans' trust in this government is at an all-time low. That makes yesterday's story detailing the Premier as well as several key ministers and inner circle advisors allegedly having repeatedly taken part in secret dinners during lockdown easier to believe. Albertans are concerned and their concerns need to be addressed. To the Premier, I urge you to rise and set the record straight here and now. Have you broken the government COVID-19 lockdown policies by gathering at restaurants or bars during any periods of time in which your government put a ban on dine-in service?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I think I made it clear earlier this afternoon that rumor is a complete lie, and that Premier has made it clear publicly that he will be taking legal action against the alt-right blog that has published that incorrect information, that false information. And look, we're going to continue to make sure that, Mr. Speaker, that we hold ourselves to a higher account, that we show a good example to Albertans as we have remaining few weeks left in these measures before we get to stage 3 of the Open for Summer plan.
The Honourable Member for Central Peace Notley.
Given that you've in the past denied violating any pandemic restrictions despite clear photographic evidence of an incident occurring with your Health Minister, Finance Minister, Minister of Environment and your Chief of Staff, and given that this government has continued to justify pursuing legal action against Alberta restaurant owners for violating health restrictions, and given that Albertans need reassurance that this government is being more forthright this time, to the Premier, how many times since December 8th, 2020 have you taken part in private indoor gatherings and fundraising events that violate your government's ban on indoor social gatherings?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Well, I haven't, Mr. Speaker, and I think the Premier has made it very clear in his public comments yesterday that what was published yesterday in that alt-right blog is a lie. There's nothing else to be said about this, Mr. Speaker.
Notley.
Given this Premier's election time promise of humble servant leadership, and given that the Premier's patio gate denial, then apology, has become a distraction and a liability for government business, and given that this is the second time in 2 weeks I'm rising to make the government aware of the temporary emergency department closure at Fairview Hospital due to physician vacancies, as it has now happened again without a response from the Minister, when will your government get back to the business of government business and provide my constituents with a timeline for when they can expect to be served with the appropriate number of health professionals? The
Honourable Minister of Health.
Well, as the member knows, Mr. Speaker, we have increased the amount that we spend on physician recruitment and retention to $90 million. And we work with organizations like RPAP. We also work with the health advisory councils and many of the independent recruitment and retention committees throughout the province to be able to help make sure that physicians and other health professionals are recruited to our rural communities, as well as working with many different organizations and the AMA in resource planning for us to be able to work together and build on the momentum that we've had with the AMA recently, to be able to build on that momentum and resource planning to make sure that our rural communities are served.
The Honourable Member for Edmonton City Centre is risen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We all want to move as fast as possible to get Albertans protected with vaccinations and open the economy safely. And Alberta has the vaccines, willing health professionals, and partnering pharmacies to do it. But 6 months in, the rollout is still largely reliant on making Albertans go vaccine hunting, booking and canceling multiple appointments, or finding their way to big box clinics at inconvenient times. For Albertans in communities like Airdrie, High Prairie, and Northeast Calgary, this clearly isn't working. So to the Minister of Health, with uptake slowing, when will we see a significant investment in pop-up clinics and other innovative collaboration with health providers to get vaccines to those who need it?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Well, first of all, I'm going to just take issue with the terminology, Mr. Speaker. The health professionals throughout AHS and our public health officials have taken very good care to not describe them as pop-up clinics. That is actually creating concerns about hesitancy. If we could all work together in calling them temporary clinics, it'd be very much helpful. But we have temporary clinics throughout the province, Mr. Speaker. We're going to continue to provide them in our mid-sized and major urbans. We also have, out of 1,500 pharmacies throughout the province, we have over 1,322 of them being able to work as temporary clinics in all of our communities.
The honourable member for Edmonton City Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Now, given I've flagged this issue in the House several times, and primary care doctors have been pushing AHS for months for more of these temporary clinics for the hardest hit communities and those who might be vaccine hesitant. And given that these clinics are vaccinating Albertans at up to 100 times the rate of the big box clinics, to the Minister of Health, your government's had months to prepare. We're weeks away from potentially lifting all restrictions, thousands of Albertans still needing a first dose. When will we see real action to work with these health providers and use these temporary clinics and other creative approaches that actually get shots in the arms of all Albertans?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Well, we have, Mr. Speaker. We've worked with community groups that have reached out to us, proposed to us what we could do to have AHS work with them. In fact, the caucus opposite was actually very helpful. All of them signed a letter to me, and within 24 hours I had spoken to AHS about a group that they wanted us to be able to reach out to here in Edmonton. We were very happy. It was a great suggestion from those opposite for us to be able to work with that organization, to be able to set up a temporary clinic, a great example of how we have in the Ministry of Health, as well as in AHS, being able to work with community partners to provide those temporary clinics.
The honourable member.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, given that one of the most effective ways for Albertans to be able to book vaccine appointments should be online, and given jurisdictions across Canada and around the globe are using creative integrated online platforms for vaccines, and AHS has an IT budget over $20 million to do the same here. And given for months the minister attacked the federal government saying he was prepped and ready if he only had the vaccines to get them into Albertans' arms. To the Minister of Health, why has your department now failed on your commitment to deliver an integrated digital vaccine portal this month? And how much money has been spent on a system that is not effective to date?
Honourable the Minister of Health.
Mr. Speaker, this is a gigantic shame that our vaccine rollout in Alberta has been a leader nationally. That if we look at the percentage of vaccines that have been deployed, we are around 95% deployed when other provinces are in the 80s. Because everybody who's working, our public health officials and our pharmacies, our physicians, have worked so hard to work together, our community groups, to have the greatest rollout of vaccines in the country. This should be lauded. It should not be defamed by the NDP.
The honourable member for Edmonton Highlands Norwood.
The University of Calgary School of Public Policy has just released their findings on the impacts of COVID-19 on the labour market. As we know, early on in the pandemic, women bore the brunt of those job losses. While the results of the study indicate those losses have almost recovered, pre-pandemic, we know that women were already working fewer hours and being paid 40% less than their male counterparts. This is a problem and it needs to be addressed. So, to the Minister for Status of Women, what steps are being taken right now to increase women's participation in the economy? And please, we need you to be specific.
The Honourable the Minister of Culture, Multiculturalism and the Status of Women.
Thank you very much for the question. And as you know, in Alberta, per capita, we have more entrepreneurial women here in Alberta than we do anywhere in the country. For every 67 men in the country in Canada, or for every 100 men, we have 67 women in the entrepreneurial space. In Alberta, it's 81. So you can imagine, as we go forward, and the work that has been done up until this point is supporting women in the sector, especially in small business. I know that small business is important to all of us, and I would like to thank everyone who has come together to make sure that those dollars are being put back into the sector for small business.
The honourable member for Edmonton Highlands Norwood.
Given that women are overrepresented in minimum wage jobs in Alberta, despite having higher levels of education than men, and it's clear that economic security is a serious issue, yet this government's website for women's economic security hasn't been updated for more than 2 years, and it has a list of initiatives from the former NDP government. So to that same minister, you know she can't take credit for a childcare project that was cancelled by her government. She can't take credit for anything that's listed on her website. So what exactly is her government doing to improve economic security for women in Alberta?
The Honourable the Minister of Culture, Multiculturalism and the Status of Women.
Well, thank you so much for the question. I would like to start, first of all, with the STEM projects that have been coming out between the Ministry of Advanced Education and the Ministry of Status of Women. This particular project is specifically directed at making sure that women, as they're going into the workforce, especially young girls, are being attracted into really excellent paying jobs. Also, you've heard that emphasis is here. Canada is also very much promoting with young girls right now in the area of coding. Canada Coding is coming into the schools. You've seen the amount of work that is happening in the tech industry right now in Alberta.
The Honourable Member for Edmonton Highlands Norwood.
Given that same study finds that parents of young children, both men and women, who depend on a childcare system that meets their needs are facing some of the largest job losses, and given that under the UCP, childcare fees are increasing in the middle of a pandemic, exacerbating the problem, as a lack of options is causing parents to leave the workforce and reduce their hours. So let's try the Minister of Children's Services. Now that there's proof that the lack of access to childcare through the pandemic is impacting men too, will she reach out to her liquor cabinet buddies and finally advocate for universal, affordable childcare?
The Honourable Minister of Children's Services.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And you know what I want to clarify for the members opposite is that while we wound down the $25 a day pilot, it was based on the feedback we got in that pilot, that it left out thousands of hardworking Alberta families and left out thousands of childcare operators right across the province. Mr. Speaker, what we're doing is directing supports to those most in need. Now families can access childcare in the centre of their choice for as low as $13 a day, not $25, that's $13. We will continue to make investments in this area because it's important for Alberta's economic recovery.
The Honourable Member for Calgary-Pagan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Deerfoot Trail is Alberta's busiest road where accidents and traffic jams are all too common. In addition to Deerfoot Trail being part of the daily commute for many of my constituents in Calgary-Pagan, it is also a major transportation line for essential goods and services. The update to Alberta's public-private partnership, P3 model, allows for greater flexibility in building infrastructure. To the Minister, what kinds of improvements can we expect to see to reduce congestion on Deerfoot Trail?
The Honourable Minister of Infrastructure has the call.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Our government understands that Deerfoot Trail is an essential artery to the city, which is becoming increasingly congested. Improvements are needed. That's why we have committed $210 million as part of the P3 model, and we expect almost $200 million in additional private funding. Taxpayers' investments will help Calgarians to get to their destinations safely, quickly, and efficiently. Some of our top priorities include lane widening, interchange improvements, new ramps, eliminating vehicles.
The Honourable Member for Calgary-Pagan.
Given that Deerfoot Trail is a vital part of many Calgarians' commutes and transportation of essential goods, and given that Deerfoot Trail is such a busy road with approximately 180,000 vehicles daily, further given that there is a significant amount of accidents and a high concentration of congestion on Deerfoot Trail, to the Minister, how can we expect these changes to ensure safer travel for Calgarians?
The Honourable Minister of Infrastructure.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Safety is a top priority for both Transportation Minister and myself. Our investment will include important safety-related work such as the upgraded signage, pavement markings and reflections on the barriers near the Caffro Bridge and sections of the road near 17th Ave. We are going to focus on improving the most congested areas on the highway first to improve the traffic flow, reduce travel times, and increase safety for commuters in the Calgary region, Mr. Speaker.
The member for Calgary-Pagan.
Thank you to the Minister for that answer. Given that Alberta's government has committed $210 million to the construction phase for the improvements and expects almost $200 million in additional private investment, and given that the strategic investment into the development of infrastructure will ultimately lead to a more streamlined and safer means of transportation for Calgarians, to the Minister, how will these investments influence economic growth in Calgary?
The Minister of Infrastructure.
Mr. Speaker, our investment will create thousands of well-paying jobs, support trade and tourism, and support future city growth. Our P3 model means we double the taxpayers' investment with private money, allowing us to upgrade twice as many bridges and intersections. These upgrades will reduce commutes, lower greenhouse gas emissions, and improve safety for 180,000 vehicles that use it daily. I would like to compliment the member from Calgary-Pagan. Unlike those guys barking there, she has been a strong...
Order. consistently hear the honourable member for Calgary-McCall. The good news is he has another question. Perhaps you'd like to ask it at the appropriate time.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last night, the government voted down several amendments to make Bill 52 an actual recall act. Instead of the fake bill they are trying to sell to Albertans, we are set on removing the least trusted premier from office. Our amendments would have ensured that the bill is true to its name and would actually enable Albertans to recall their MLAs. Can the Minister of Justice explain why he intends to pass a bill clearly won't give Albertans any power to remove their elected officials? Is he afraid of being out of his job?
The Honourable the Minister of Health.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm very pleased to stand for our colleague, the Minister of Justice and the Solicitor General. Mr. Speaker, as the member knows, as the amendments come forward, we're always a little bit more able to respond to the amendments when we get those amendments in a timely way with lots of warning, and so we can have robust discussion in committee of the whole. And the Assembly had made their decisions on those amendments, Mr. Speaker, and I will leave it for the Assembly to vote on the amendments that come forward from the NDP.
The Honourable Member for Calgary-McCall.
Given that as the Premier rules from the rooftop patio of the Sky Palace, Albertans down below are outraged at broken promises and his mismanagement, and given that so many Albertans have written to us wanting an avenue to hold this Premier accountable, but the Premier won't even commit to his leadership review vote for more than a year or bring in a real recall legislation, will the Premier or Minister explain why they are so scared of their constituents and Albertans?
The Honourable the Minister of Health.
Mr. Speaker, nothing could be further from the truth. The fact is that this piece of legislation is modeled after the successful legislation in British Columbia, and that's why we are proceeding, because there is already a template that's provided in another province. This is an opportunity for us to be able to provide this power to Albertans, for them to be able to have a say. And that we're very proud as a caucus and as a government to be able to help Albertans have that power provided to them.
Member for Calgary-McCall.
Given that the government is refusing to indicate a date for which the fake recall bill will come into force, and given that many suspect that's deliberate because they are trying to see if they can improve this Premier approval rating first, to the Minister, simple question: when will this bill come into force? No more ducking and dodging my question. Just give Albertan a real date when this recall legislation will come into force.
The Honourable the Minister of Health.
Well, Mr. Speaker, we all know that the coming into force date is often, sometimes that has multiple different considerations. But look, this is a piece of legislation that has been lauded by many organizations, including the Canadian Taxpayers Foundation, that has said the recall legislation is a big win for government accountability in Alberta, because Albertans, other than those who are opposite, which we all know are the old autocratic party.
Order. We all heard the question by the Honourable Member for Calgary-McCall very clearly. Now I'd like to hear the answer clearly as well.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And as we all know, those opposite are the old autocratic party, but Albertans are lauding this legislation because it is a big win for government accountability here in Alberta.
The Honourable Member for Edmonton Decore has a question.
To provide some cover for this UCP government's undermining of property rights of Albertans with the elimination of things like formal timelines, the Associate Minister of Red Tape Reduction made a promise to this House. He promised that Albertans concerned about their property rights could access the Real Property Rights Committee. My question is simple and will only require a yes or a no. Does the Associate Minister of Red Tape Reduction stand by his claims and promise that the issue of Albertans' property rights should be heard by the Real Property Rights Committee?
The Honourable the Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, in all the years that I have been in the legislature, and you've been around here a long time yourself, Mr. Speaker, every time that a piece of property rights legislation came to this place, that party across the way voted against it, Mr. Speaker. They do not stand up for landowners, Mr. Speaker, and frankly, their record shows they don't care about property rights. But this party, this government does, has a clear platform endorsed by Keith Wilson and other property rights advocates, Mr. Speaker, that is working its way through a special committee of the legislature, an all-party committee, which is going to hear from Albertans, and we're going to end up with the best piece of legislation, Mr. Speaker. The question will be, will he vote for that legislation?
The Honourable Member for Edmonton Decore.
The record, eh? Given that despite the assurances of the Associate Minister of Red Tape, that Real Property Rights Committee exists to support property rights claims, it appears that some of his colleagues haven't gotten the message. Given that the member for Leduc-Beaumont moved to prevent the Real Property Rights Committee from considering the Surface Rights Act, the Water Act, and much more from the mandate of the committee, when the Associate Minister told Albertans the committee would protect property rights, did he know of this plan to gut its ability to do that, or Albertans' property rights just red tape to this minister?
The Honourable Government House Leader.
Well, again, Mr. Speaker, the Honourable Member wants to spend a significant period of time inside a committee that is focused on dealing with property rights inside the province, Mr. Speaker, by pivoting to talk about important environmental issues. Mr. Speaker, environmental issues like that are important, Mr. Speaker. I want to stress that very, very much. But this committee has an important job to finally deal with the property rights concerns of Albertans, particularly rural Albertans, who have asked this chamber for years to deal with some of the horrendous situations that we find in our legislation when it comes to property rights, situations that were endorsed and continued by that party when they were in government, Mr. Speaker. We're going to fix it.
The Honourable Member.
Well, given that, once again, we have a situation where the Associate Minister says one thing while the actions of the government go in the opposite direction, and given that either this minister thinks property rights are red tape, which could explain why he's watering them down, or he's completely out of the loop on his file, will the Associate Minister stand in his House, tell his colleagues that surface rights and water must be part of any conversation about property rights? And if he can't, will he admit to Albertans that their property rights are less important to him than doing the bidding of the Premier?
The Honourable Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, actually, surface rights are one of the most important things that we need to talk about when it comes to property rights, and without a doubt, Mr. Speaker, in this government's platform, Mr. Speaker, it is clear changes that this government has proposed to bring forward to this chamber when it deals with concerns with around surface rights and other property rights issues, Mr. Speaker. This is why we have a select committee working on that to bring the best legislation we can to this House, Mr. Speaker. And again, this is a platform that was endorsed by Keith Wilson, one of the greatest champions of property rights over the last few years inside this province, Mr. Speaker. And if the Honourable Member would like to learn a little bit about property rights, I'd encourage him to give him a call.
The Honourable Member for Camrose.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. The town of Galahad is a community in my constituency that is home to the Galahad Care Centre, a long-term care facility. It provides 24/7 residential care for people with complex medical needs, including assessing and treating health issues and helping with everyday activities. Recently, AHS closed the long-term care facility and moved all 18 residents to other sites. Can the Minister of Health please provide an update on the status of the situation?
Minister of Health.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And despite the defamation of the member for Edmonton City Centre, the facility is not closed. AHS has temporarily relocated 18 of the residents and the care staff to other facilities, but home care and ambulatory services remain operational at the care centre. It's a temporary relocation. As of 9:30 a.m. of June 4th, all long-term, all the residents who need to be transported at Galahad have been safely relocated to alternative care facilities within Central Zone. Nursing staff from Galahad have been temporarily redeployed to help care for residents in alternate facilities. And this week, AHS has been following up.
The Honourable Member for Camrose.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to the Minister for the answer. Given that when AHS closed the Galahad Care Centre, they did not consult the community, and 18 residents were moved to other sites, and given that AHS has been struggling to find long-term care staff across the province, to the same minister, why did AHS deem it necessary for the site to close, and why was the community not consulted?
The Honourable the Minister of Health.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And as just a reminder, the site has not closed, but this was obviously for the relocation of the 18 residents was a difficult decision for AHS to make, as it has made some of these difficult decisions throughout the pandemic. It was only done after careful consideration to make sure that everybody throughout the province gets the care that they need. And that being said, AHS should have proactively scheduled a community consultation to better inform the residents of the evolving situation. And thanks to the concerns that are raised by the Honourable Member, a community consultation is scheduled for tonight, where AHS will provide a comprehensive update on the situation.
The Honourable Member for Camrose.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to the Minister for the answer. Given that rural Albertans have been facing challenges when it comes to rural health care for decades, and given that the COVID-19 pandemic brought unprecedented challenges to our health care system, especially in rural Alberta, to the Minister, will the facility be open again soon? And what measures are in place to ensure that AHS does not close any long-term care facilities in rural Alberta?
Honourable Minister of Health.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And AHS will look to resume continuing care services as soon as possible. The temporary disruption in long-term care services is expected to last a minimum of 4 months while recruitment efforts are redoubled and new staff can be onboarded. Dedicated teams are working to recruit the RNs, the LPNs, the healthcare aides to Galahad. And the facility has been a valuable resource for the community. And we expect it to continue to be going forward. Just as you and the community want to see all services resume, so do we.
The Honourable Member for Bonnyville, Cold Lake, St. Paul.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. This past weekend, St. Paul and Elk Point Health Care Centres announced a reduction in their acute care beds due to a high number of registered nurses and licensed practical nurse vacancies. This impacts 10 of 30 acute care beds in St. Paul and 5 out of 12 in Elk Point. I've been advocating to AHS for better recruitment of medical professions for over 6 years. To the Minister of Health, what is AHS doing to address this situation and to avoid future staff shortages in Northern Alberta?
The Honourable the Minister of Health.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And like the Honourable Member, we value the work of our rural physicians to everything they do every day to bring care to patients in the St. Paul and area. Our physician resource planners are dedicated to identifying and pursuing international and domestic recruitment opportunities. They work closely with various community partners and organizations such as the Health Advisory Councils and as well as some of the independent recruitment committees. The competition to hire qualified professionals nationally and internationally is tough, and we continue to work hard to find new, innovative solutions to attract skilled care providers.
Honourable Member for Bonnyville, Cold Lake, St. Paul.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Given that the Mayor of St. Paul has been able to sign on 7 new doctors to come to St. Paul over the last few months, and given that AHS had said that no one is applying, but given that now the holdup seems to be getting these doctors through accreditation, Minister, a couple of these doctors that are willing to move to rural Alberta have been waiting 2 years for accreditation spots. Are you working with AHS and the College of Physicians to expedite this process?
Honourable the Minister of Health.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I commend the Honourable Member as well as the Mayor of St. Paul for all the work that they've undertaken to attract new physicians. As you know, all 7 physicians have signed contracts but are in various stages of completing the assessments that are required by the CPSA, the College of Physicians and Surgeons. Right now, the start dates have been determined for 3 candidates in August, September, and November of this year, and I'm told that their assessments are going well, and we're optimistic that these 3 physicians will start on time, and I'm so happy to commit to the Honourable Member to meet with the College to strongly encourage them to expedite, as he's asking for it, to expedite the completion of these assessments as soon as possible.
Honourable Member.
Thank you, Minister, and thank you, Mr. Speaker. Given that one way we can work to solve the shortage of medical professionals in rural communities is through dedicated spots for rural medical students at U of A and U of C. Further, given that the U of A reserves only 10 spots each year for qualified rural Alberta applicants, you've heard this from me many times. To the Minister of Advanced Education, will you commit to working with these schools to provide 50 dedicated spots in each facility for students willing to move back to rural communities where they are needed?
The Honourable the Minister of Advanced Education.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I want to take a quick moment to thank the member opposite for his incredibly strong advocacy. I know he's raised this issue with me personally on a number of different occasions, and we've had extensive opportunities to discuss it. So I want to thank him for being such a strong advocate for his community. With the University of Alberta currently, the member's right, there are 10 spots that are reserved for qualified Alberta, for rural candidates. There's more that we need to do. I'm very happy to continue working with the member as well with the Minister of Health to see what more there is that we can do to further strengthen medical programming in our
Honourable members, this concludes the time allotted for oral question period in 30 seconds or less. We will return to the remainder of the daily routine.
Presenting reports by standing and special committees.
The Honourable Chair, Deputy Chair of the Standing Committee on Private Bills, Public Bills.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and to you I say good afternoon. As Deputy Chair of the Standing Committee on Private Bills and Private Members' Public Bills, I am pleased to table the committee's final report on Bill 219, Workers' Compensation Expanding Presumptive Coverage Amendment Act 2021, sponsored by the Honourable Member from Edmonton Manning. The bill was referred to the committee on June 3rd, 2021. Mr. Speaker, the report recommends that Bill 219 proceed. I request concurrence of the Assembly in the final report of Bill 219.
Honourable members, the motion for concurrence on the report on 219, Workers' Compensation Expanding Presumptive Coverage Amendment Act 2021 is debatable pursuant to Standing Order 18.1b. Are there any wishing to add comment? Seeing a number of so, that the motion for concurrence will be debated at the next available opportunity.
Presenting petitions. Notices of motions.
The Honourable Government House Leader.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to give oral notice of Government Motion 85 to be put on the order paper in my name. Be it resolved that the Legislative Assembly urge the Prime Minister to respect the democratic voices of Albertans and refrain from filling Alberta's 2 vacant Senate seats until Albertans have had an opportunity to elect nominees for appointment to the Senate on October 18th, 2021, and further urge the Prime Minister to commit to filling the 2 vacant Senate seats with those individuals who receive the highest number of votes in that Senate election.
Introduction of bills. Tabling returns and reports.
The Honourable Member for Cardston-Siksika.
Well, thank you again, Mr. Speaker. And I rise in accordance with Section 22 of the Auditor General Act. As Chair of the Standing Committee on Legislative Offices, I am pleased to table the appropriate number of copies of the following reports. 1. Report of the Auditor General of Alberta, June 2021 report. And 2. Processes of managed bail hearings and case management of criminal prosecutions performance audit. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Are there other tablings? The Honourable Member for Cypress Medicine Hat.
Speaker, I have 2. First of all, an op-ed from the Alberta Director of the Canadian Taxpayer Federation supporting recall, but wanting a much lower threshold and not wanting a double vote that this government has put in. And secondly, from the UCP Virtual AGM 2020, Policy 19, there too, 75% of their members want a lower threshold for the recall law that this government has just put in. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Edmonton Highlands Norwood.
Speaker, I rise with the requisite number of copies of a letter from a teacher in my riding. She's urging this government to take action on racism, and she's sharing the thoughts of her students who are grade 6 students.
Seeing none, the clerk.
Tablings to the clerk. Deferred divisions.
Honourable members, we are at points of order, and at 2:37, the Honourable Deputy Opposition House Leader rose on a point of order.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm rising on 23H in particular, and J. In response to a question from a private member here, the Minister of Health, the question was about a facility where a member raised serious concerns, AHS not consulting residents, and concerns with respect to relocation of the residents in that facility. And the Health Minister, instead of answering that question whether the facility is relocated or closed or not, just went on to accuse member from Edmonton Centre of defamation. And I think that's not the first time that the Health Minister has used that kind of language. He often resorts to such accusation, even more serious than that. So I think, Mr. Speaker, that you should note that as a point of order and ask Health Minister to withdraw such accusations and refrain from accusing other members of things that they didn't know or didn't do. And also, I think it would be helpful if we could retract, withdraw, and resign. Thank you.
The Honourable Deputy Government Whip.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I don't see how this is a point of order. I truly believe it's a matter of debate. I do not have the benefit of the blues, but I would say that, if we're going to talk about the word to defame, I think when the honourable member from Edmonton Centre makes the comments that he does, both in his questions and also when he's throwing comments across the aisle, defames himself, I think that this is not a point of order, rather a matter of debate. I don't see how this meets the threshold of 23H or 23J. And so, Mr. Speaker, I do encourage you to rule against this point of order.
Are there others?
Mr. Speaker.
The member for Edmonton City Centre.
Just to note that the accusation is that I was defaming, which would mean libel or slander. I would note that the information I presented about that facility being closed was in fact echoed by the minister's own member, who repeatedly noted that that facility in her constituency is in fact closed and was closed by AHS. Thank you.
Appreciate the submission. That did sound a lot like continuing debate, but I appreciate why you would want to do that. I am prepared to rule on the point of order, and honourable members, all members enjoy absolute immunity and impunity of the freedom of speech inside the chamber, but that freedom of speech does not come without a responsibility. And making an accusation that another member has defamed is a serious action and a serious accusation. I have the benefit of the blues. Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Despite that defamation from the member of Edmonton City Centre, the facility is not closed. Now, whether or not the facility is closed or open, the Speaker takes no position, nor do I care. But when a member makes an accusation of defamation inside the chamber, it is a serious matter and ought not be done. The Honourable Deputy Government Whip to apologize and withdraw.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On behalf of the Honourable Health Minister, I apologize and withdraw for the comments of defaming, and also apologize and withdraw my own comments of suggesting the member from Edmonton City Centre defames himself when he speaks.
I appreciate that very thorough and robust apology. Thank you. Honourable members, I consider this matter dealt with and concluded. We are at orders of the day, orders du jour.
Government bills and orders. For third reading, Bill 72, Preserving Canada's Economic Prosperity Act. Honourable Mrs. Savage.
The Honourable the Minister of Energy.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to move third reading of Bill 72, Preserving Canada's Economic Prosperity Act. Mr. Speaker, passing this bill would further cement the government's commitment to protecting the value of our natural resources, and it would ensure that we have every option at our disposal to defend Alberta, our economy, our resources, and our people. As with previous legislation of the same name, it provides the Minister of Energy, if necessary, with the authority to restrict the export of crude oil and natural gas from Alberta. However, minor but very important language changes will strengthen this legislation in the event legal challenges arise. The Constitution gives provinces the authority over the interprovincial export of primary production of natural resources, and by excluding references to refined fuels, this legislation more closely aligns with this concept and more closely aligns with the Constitution. Peter Lougheed fought for the constitutional right of Alberta and Albertans to manage our natural resources, and this legislation demonstrates how serious we are about defending these rights. At this point, I would like to thank my colleagues in the House for supporting this bill, and with that, Mr. Speaker, I move that Bill 72 be read a third time.
Thank you, Honourable Minister. Are there any members wishing to join debate? I see the Honourable Member for Edmonton Beverly Clareview has risen.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I would gladly support this bill if it actually did anything to help secure Alberta's energy future. You see, Mr. Speaker, the government will complain over and over again about how the previous bill that was brought in under the previous NDP government was unconstitutional, which maybe it was, but I'll tell you this much, Mr. Speaker, that bill had the teeth that actually put, it worked, Mr. Speaker. It actually had the teeth to be able to turn off the taps. And turn off the taps, not that I would hope a government would want to use it, but as a last resort to protect their own interests and to ensure that the people on the other side would not like it much and would tell their government to come back to the table for conversations. But, Mr. Speaker, that bill that we passed, that this government today criticizes us for, is the first piece of legislation that this government proclaimed when they formed government. And then they went and let it expire after 2 years. And then decided it's time to criticize the NDP opposition for a bill that they proclaimed, they applauded, they voted in favor, and then they let expire 2 years later. So what we have before us today, Mr. Speaker, is a watered-down version of a bill that will not impact refined products. Now, we know that there are, and I don't have the volume I don't have the volume of how much crude gets shipped to the West Coast. But I can tell you that it is refined products that would have the greatest impact on people, on everyone. And that's what made that bill a much stronger version than this current bill. You know, Mr. Speaker, we've seen time and time again this government attempt or pay lip service to supporting the energy industry. But when we look at their actions, they're quite contradictory. I mean, you have this current government spending $30 million a year on a failed war room, which has become an international embarrassment. The government succeeded in putting Alberta on the international map and being discussed in a number of communities. We are known for a number of very positive things, but under this current government, we now have a war room that is run by a failed UCP candidate who has done nothing but make mistake after mistake. They have plagiarized not one logo, but two, and continue to embarrass Alberta and our energy sector. I mean, you know, if the energy minister sits down with some of the players in the energy space, we know that they're telling her to quietly shut down the war room or maybe get them to stop embarrassing the very sector that is facing a struggle, Mr. Speaker, from the global prices to other pressures that are being put on them. And this UCP government is not helping them. You know who's helping them, Mr. Speaker? They're helping themselves, and they see an alignment between their announcement this week on their targets on emissions reductions, aligning, interestingly, with comments made by the Leader of the Official Opposition this week. And so our energy sector knows where they need to go. They know what they need to do. But this UCP government is acting, and their actions are about 40 years behind the times. Instead of focusing on critical investments for upgrading and refining more of our product here, instead of looking at how to support the energy industry, to pull carbon out of the barrel, to reduce their GHGs, to be world leaders in reaching net zero, this government picks fights with people and continues to reduce the confidence of people worldwide about how clean our energy sector is. Mr. Speaker, I'm very proud of the fact that in 2018, under the previous NDP government, we initiated a campaign, Keep Canada Working campaign. That campaign, when it started, Mr. Speaker, there were 4 in 10 Canadians who supported the Trans Mountain Pipeline. Less than 40%. At the end of our campaign, that number was 7 in 10. And that was because of the hard work done by the previous government to engage with Canadians, not just to share the facts about the safety of pipelines and how we have high environmental standards, but we engaged in meaningful dialogue that moved the needle. Fast forward to today, and we have a government that continually jumps up and down and shouts at everyone else, lays blame all over the place, points fingers and screams, and does nothing to move the needle, including gambling with Albertans' dollars. A $1.3 billion gamble. $1.3 billion this government just lost betting on Donald Trump. Albertans are upset and continue to be upset, and this government gives them a new reason every day. Every day, Mr. Speaker. That $1.3 billion could have been much better used. Could have been used to actually support the efforts that our energy sector is making to reduce their GHGs, to get to zero, to be a world leader, to be first in the world, to get to that target. And they know, Mr. Speaker, that with the NDP, they have an ally, they have an advocate, and they have a party that will support them in their endeavor and look for innovative ways to help them achieve their goal. This bill, Mr. Speaker, is a shadow of the previous bill that it's representing. It's unfortunate, Mr. Speaker, that this government isn't willing to do more for a struggling sector. So, Mr. Speaker, I'll conclude my comments by stating that this bill, similar to the Recall Act, which will never actually recall a single individual. I'm willing to bet a bottle of scotch on that, maybe Jameson's. This bill will do very little to protect Alberta and Canada's economic prosperity. And I urge the government to take much more meaningful action to support our industries, especially our energy industry, but looking beyond our energy at the whole economic package that Alberta has to offer, including in tourism, life sciences, bioenergy, and to support the very men and women who are the economic engine of this province. Thank you.
Thank you, Honourable Member. Are there any other members wishing to join debate? Seeing none, I am prepared to ask the question. The Honourable Minister of Energy has moved third reading of Bill 72, Preserving Canada's Economic Prosperity Act. All those in favour of third reading, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed, please say no. That is carried and so ordered. Honorable members, a division has been called. For the members wishing to vote remotely, please join the Microsoft Teams meeting and keep your cameras on at all times. Calling the members. Honourable members, a division has been called on the motion for third reading of Bill 72, Preserving Canada's Economic Prosperity Act, as moved by the Honourable Minister of Energy. All those members in the chamber who are in favour of third reading, please rise and be counted.
The Honourable Mr. Madhu, the Honourable Mr. Panda, Mr. Nixon, the Honourable Mrs. Savage, the Honourable Mr. Nally, the Honourable Mr. Taves, the Honourable Mr. Dreeshen, the Honourable Mr. Nixon, Mr. Amory, Mr. Yassine, the Honourable Mr. Nicolaides, Mr. Scow, the Honourable Ms. Schultz, Mr. Newdorf, Ms. Armstrong-Homanek, Ms. Lovely, the Honourable Mr. Copping, Ms. Furr, Ms. Isaac, Mr. Horner, Mr. Rutherford, Mr. Tour, Mr. Sigurdsson, Mr. Jones, Mr. Hanson, Mr. Van Dyken, Mr. Sabia, Mr. Shepherd, Mr. Diol, Mr. Billis, Mr. Agan, Mr. Long, Mr. Smith, the Honourable Mrs. Ahir, Member Carson, Ms. Goring, Ms. Sweet, Mr. Rain.
Thank you, honourable members. All those in the chamber opposed to third reading, please rise and be counted. We will now do a roll call alphabetically by last name to all those members who are participating remotely. When you hear your name, please unmute your mic and state your vote loudly and clearly for or against the motion for third reading. Once you finish voting, please re-mute your mic. Remember to leave your cameras on for the duration of the vote, and all members in the chamber, please remain seated.
Ms. Glasgow.
In favor.
Ms. Goodridge.
In favor.
Mr. Godfrey.
In favor.
Mr. Orr.
In favor.
Thank you. If you did not hear your name, please unmute now and identify yourself to be recognized to vote. Hearing none.
Mr. Speaker, total for the motion 42, total against nil.
Thank you, honourable members. That is carried and so ordered.
Bill 72, Preserving Canada's Economic Prosperity Act, is now read a third time. Under Government Bills and Orders for third reading, Bill 63, Police, Street Checks and Carding Amendment Act 2021. Honourable Mr. Madhu.
I see the Honourable Minister of Justice has risen.
Thank you so much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it is my pleasure to rise this afternoon to move third reading of Bill 63, the Police, Street Checks and Carding Amendment Act. Mr. Speaker, last November, Alberta's government banned the police practice of carding and created new guidelines for law enforcement to conduct lawful street checks, which remain an important investigation tool. The bill before us today will go one step further by providing much-needed legal clarification of the difference between the arbitrary discriminatory practice of carding and street checks, which, when lawfully used, are an important and effective policing tool. This distinction is spelled out in a new proposed section of the Police Act, specifically Section 38, Sub 1 of the Act. To be clear, Mr. Speaker, the amended Police Act would both define carding and forbid its use. At the same time, it will give police the statutory authority to collect and retain personal information that is voluntarily provided as a result of non-detention, non-arrest interaction with a member of the public. The key distinction here is that this information is provided voluntarily by citizens, and citizens are made aware of their right during the interaction with law enforcement. This is what is often referred to as a street check. Such interactions are very common and have always been a useful practice in law enforcement when used lawfully. However, there is no legislation specifically permitting street checks or providing guidelines regarding their use. This legislation provided the legal authorization for street checks that the practice previously lacked. It also gives the Lieutenant Governor in Council the power to make regulations regarding clear guidelines surrounding the proper use of information gathered during street checks, requirement for police officer training, requirement for creating and reviewing street checks and standard, an initiative to educate the police and the public on street checks. This bill, Mr. Speaker, recognizes that there is a fundamental power imbalance within every encounter between a police officer and a member of the public. That is why we must be careful to place limits on police authority and make sure it is wielded responsibly and does not serve merely to reinforce social inequalities. In short, Mr. Speaker, the justification for performing a street check must never be arbitrary or capricious. What's more, the information collected during a street check must be handled carefully and with a respect for that individual's privacy. Our government worked with the Office of the Information and Privacy Commissioner to include a section that would outline how and when this information may be disclosed. As well, by creating statutory authority for street checks, this bill will make any information gathered during a street check subject to FOIP request, thereby creating another layer of accountability for law enforcement. Finally, this bill would amend the Police Act to authorize other regulations pertaining to street checks as needed. Mr. Speaker, no democratic society can survive without the public's faith and trust in law enforcement. Practices like cordon have significantly undermined that trust, particularly in racialized communities. This bill will enhance the relationship between police and racialized Alberta citizens, creating a greater sense of trust and fairness. It also provides clear, reasonable guidelines for a practice that law enforcement officers have often been left to interpret for themselves. Mr. Speaker, previous governments were unwilling to address this fundamental issue of fairness for Alberta citizens. Unlike the members opposite, who merely offered bromides to racialized communities and refused to ban cordon despite pressures from their own NDP-aligned special interest groups, and despite series of protests before the steps of this legislature. Mr. Speaker, since we introduced this bill, the NDP has been absolutely disingenuous about what this legislation does. In fact, their criticisms of this legislation are so beyond the pale, they do not deserve to be repeated by myself in this chamber. What their comments on this bill do reveal is a complete lack of respect for the collective intelligence of Albertans and a complete disregard for the facts. And that, Mr. Speaker, doesn't surprise me. I've never been surprised since I, got before the floor of this assembly. The only explanation for their complete campaign of fear and smear is that they don't want Albertans, especially racialized folks in our communities, to know that they failed to ban cordon, even though they were once the greatest virtue signaling government in our country's history, obviously after our current Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, the NDP simply cannot accept that fact. that it is a conservative government that is truly reforming policing in this province when they did nothing. Mr. Speaker, it is absolutely critical for me to put this on the record so that history can judge the true nature of what transpired between 2015 and 2019, that the NDP were in charge of this particular province on this particular issue. The NDP failed to ban carding. That is a fact. They had 4 years to do so, and they failed. That, Mr. Speaker, is their record. This government is delivering real change when it comes to policing and addressing the legitimate concerns of racialized Albertans. While the NDP deterred for 4 years on these important matters, I trust they will do the right thing and support this very important bill. Mr. Speaker, with that, I move third reading of Bill 63.
Thank you, Honourable Minister. Are there any members wishing to join debate? I see the Honourable Member for Edmonton City Centre with a full 20, should he choose to take it.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I appreciate the opportunity to rise and speak to third reading of Bill 63. The issue of carding, street checks, and the interactions between racialized people and police have indeed been long-standing in the province of Alberta. Under multiple Conservative governments, indeed under our time in government, and under the term of this government. There's no denying that has been true. And there is no denying that it is an issue that had to be addressed and needs to be addressed. And it should be addressed in full. So the government is moving forward with its legislation to address the issue. Having had the opportunity to follow on the consultation and the work that our government had done, we did not get to the point of legislation. The minister is correct on that. Those are the facts. But other jurisdictions in Canada have, in fact, moved on this. The province of Ontario was the first to take those steps. And indeed, during our review of the issue and the opportunity I had to consult with community and talk with others, folks were clear that what was done in Ontario was not enough, that there were gaps and issues. And indeed, the province of Ontario recognized as much in appointing Ontario Justice the Honourable Michael Tulloch to undertake a review of the legislation and regulation that had come forward in the province of Ontario. Now, the Honourable Justice noted that there were several gaps and issues. He issued a fulsome report, 310 pages. Now, my colleague, the member for Calgary-Macomb, in considering the legislation that was brought forward by the government last fall, quite rapidly, I would note, Mr. Speaker, on very short notice, during a very difficult time politically for the government in the midst of the second wave. The government brought this forward and we gave it consideration, and my colleague from Calgary-Macomb dove deeply into the legislation and the recommendations that had come forward from the Honourable Justice Michael Tulloch. And he found that in many places within the legislation that has been brought forward by the Minister of Justice, there are issues that were clearly identified by the Honourable Justice that were not addressed by the Minister's legislation. Indeed, my colleague, in reviewing the legislation, raised specific concerns about potential loopholes that are created by this bill. Now, I understand, Mr. Speaker, that this is complex. There's a lot of different terminology, there's a lot of different words that get thrown around, And it can be difficult for the average person in the public to truly understand the situation and what the impacts are. But as the minister himself noted, what is fundamental here is addressing the power imbalance that exists between members of the public and the police, and particularly when that encounter is between police and members of racialized communities. So to be clear, the context is that carding is already an illegal practice. That is recognized, as the minister himself has said, under human rights legislation here in Canada. So the purpose of the legislation is to further clarify and define what exists as carding and what exists as what is commonly referred to as a street check. So on carding, the definition being when officers randomly request personal information from a member of the public without reasonable grounds. And on street checks, interactions or observations that result in an officer collecting personal information. So looking at this within this bill, in terms of street checks, it's then concluding that this collection of the information is for the purpose of entering that information into a database for future crime prevention activities. So not related necessarily to a specific current investigation or case. And the wording of these definitions is somewhat vague. It then can create exceptions for carding under a different name, but the essential same principle. That has been the point of concern. Now, the minister disagrees. He is free to do so. But the fact is, simply because the minister was the first to introduce a bill does not mean that bill should simply be given a free pass. This is a serious situation. It deserves due rigor. And it should be measured against the highest standard that has been developed, which so far is the report that has been issued by Honorable Justice Tulloch. So we have a commonality between these definitions in the government's bill, which is basically that a police officer will be stopping an individual who has not committed a crime, in some cases may not even be suspected of committing a crime, and there may be collection of information. And that our concern with what is left open in this legislation is that that will then continue to allow for disproportionate targeting of racialized persons. Now, my colleague from Calgary, McCall, is a lawyer. I am not. He has laid out much more ably the specific legalities and concerns that amount to this. And his analysis has been agreed on by others in the legal field and others in the public sphere who have been working on this issue and calling for a change. I know that my colleague from Calgary, McCall, engaged in deep consultation with legal experts, academics, folks working in the field, folks working on the front lines, and communities that are engaged. And he brought forward thoughtful amendments based on the very recommendations from Honorable Justice Tulloch. Now, the minister denigrated those as frivolous, unnecessary, as posturing, political posturing. To be clear, Mr. Speaker, these are directly taken from that review, from the Honorable Justice Tulloch. And if the minister is calling those frivolous and political posturing, that is what he is referring to the Honorable Justice as, for having raised those as specific things that needed to be addressed to truly address the issue of carding and street checks. That is why my colleague brought forward an amendment to require police officers to proactively inform individuals that may decline and discontinue. To inform individuals that they have the right to decline to engage in a conversation or to walk away from a conversation with a police officer. That they do not have to provide information. That's recommendation 7.2 from the Justice's report. The minister said it was not necessary and led his colleagues in voting that down. We brought forward amendments regarding disciplinary procedures for police officers, regarding how police record and report activities and offer documentation to the individuals, on establishing public education and outreach, which the minister in his closing remarks said he will do, but was not willing to put in the legislation to be required to be done. We brought forward an amendment regarding general and specific corrective actions and practices to be reported to the public, and for training for police officers on bias, discrimination, and racism. Lastly, on requiring a 90-day public posting and public consultation, and an enhanced and formal consultation with Indigenous communities on any further regulations regarding police and public to be developed under the Act. It is our job, Mr. Speaker, as official opposition, whether our government brought in a piece of legislation or not, to give due rigor to analysis of legislation that is brought forward by this government. In debate on this bill, I have made great efforts to refrain from partisan commentary on the minister or his political party. At no point in our debate on this bill have I made a broad accusation about every member of the UCP. At no point have I suggested that the minister has some ulterior motive or questioned his credentials as a representative of black communities in the province of Alberta. I wish I could say the same was true of the minister. If this is truly legislation that he is bringing forward because he believes he is doing so for the right reasons, then let's let that legislation stand on those merits. It would certainly be my hope that if the minister is bringing forward this legislation because he truly wants to do right by the people of Alberta, that I will not see social media posts after the vote today making accusations of myself or my colleagues, misrepresenting what we have said in this House. That this would not be, say, the subject of a fundraising email. The minister will have his opportunity. The government has a majority. They have the ability to pass this legislation. And he will have his opportunity, I guess, to follow through on the promises he made today about his next steps once this legislation passes. And it will be our job as the official opposition to hold him to those commitments. To ensure that this is followed through. Now, Mr. Speaker, I spoke of that report from Justice Tulloch. Recommendation 5.1 in his report. I quote, "At the outset, I recommend that the regulation expressly stipulate that the purpose or objective is to prevent arbitrary or random stops of individuals. Prevent outright. Not allow exceptions for. Not write legislation in such a way that there is wiggle room. Indeed, the justice went on to say, I conclude that random street checks, which take considerable time and effort for a police service to conduct, have little to no verifiable effects or benefits, relating to the level of crime or even arrests. He notes that, in fact, even before the regulation that was brought in the province of Ontario, many police services had already discontinued the practice because of its lack of effectiveness. I thus recommend discontinuing the use of random street checks altogether. This is somewhat in contrast to the minister's remarks opening third reading, in which he stated that street checks have always been a useful tool when used lawfully. The Honourable Justice disagrees. I disagree, Mr. Speaker. My colleagues disagree. Justice Tulloch is clear on what he considers to be arbitrary. He said it is considered to be arbitrary unless the police officer can articulate a proper reason for the attempted collection. He is quite clear that it should not be based on, he says, the reasonable suspicion must be based on something more than a mere suspicion or a hunch. My colleague, the member for Calgary-McCall, brought forward amendments to address that. They were rejected. So to use a phrase that we often joke about in terms of conventions where parties are debating policy, Mr. Speaker, we do not believe this bill goes far enough. I want to be absolutely fundamentally clear. I believe we must ban the practice of carding and street checks. That is the official position of myself and all of my colleagues in the Alberta NDP caucus. We believe there should be legislation in the province of Alberta which does so thoroughly, as laid out in Honourable Justice Tulloch's report. Bill 63 does not meet that standard. The government has a majority and the ability to pass this legislation without our support. They have the ability to take the step and to demonstrate to the people of Alberta that they intend to follow through on the promise that they have made. Based on that fact, I believe it is important for me, as a representative of people of the Alberta, as a representative of racialized communities, as a member of the opposition, to, on principle, vote against this legislation, because it does not do what it needs to do. It does not accomplish the task that it needs to accomplish. It does not provide the level of protection for racialized Albertans that it should provide. That is the standard set out in Justice Tulloch's report that I believe should be implemented in the province of Alberta, and I will not vote for a bill that does not do so. And I know I can speak for myself that given the opportunity, I will work to ensure that we have legislation that does. So let me again be clear, Mr. Speaker, just in case anyone wishes to be disingenuous about the position of myself and my caucus. In the case that anyone should choose to be partisan about an issue of such great importance to the people of Alberta, something that multiple ministers of this government have admonished all of us about this week. Let me be 100% absolutely clear We support the banning of carding and street checks in the province of Alberta. Bill 63 does not accomplish that goal. And it is for that reason, on point of principle, that we will not add our voice to governments in passing this legislation. I believe that is what I owe to the people of Alberta, to the racialized communities of Alberta, to make it clear that this legislation does not do enough. They deserve better. That in no way diminishes the fact that the minister was the first, indeed, minister in Alberta to bring forward any form of carding legislation. That is his legacy. But once the vote is finished, Mr. Speaker, the minister's legacy will be what he does next. It will be what is the result for the people of Alberta. And it is Albertans, and indeed racialized Albertans, that will have the opportunity to make that judgment. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Honourable Member. Are there any members wishing to join debate? Seeing none, I am prepared to ask the question. The Honourable Minister of Justice and Solicitor General has moved third reading of Bill 63, Police Street Checks and Carding Amendment Act 2021. All those in favour of third reading, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed, please say no. No. That is carried and so ordered.
Bill 63, Police Street Checks and Carding Amendment Act 2021 is now read a third time. Under Government Bills and Orders for third reading, Bill 67, Skilled Trades and Apprenticeship Education Act. Adjourned debate. Ms. Gray.
We are on Bill 67. Are there any members wishing to join debate? Seeing none. I am prepared to ask the question. The Honourable Minister of Advanced Education has moved third reading of Bill 67, Skilled Trades and Apprenticeship Education Act. Those in favour of the motion for third reading, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed, please say no. No. That is carried and so ordered. I see a division has been called. For those members who wish to vote remotely, please log into the Microsoft Teams meeting now. Keep your cameras, of course, on at all times. Ring the bells and call on the members. Honourable members, a division has been called on the motion for third reading of Bill 67, Skilled Trades and Apprenticeship Education Act. All those members in the chamber who are in favour of third reading, please rise and be counted.
The Honourable Mr. Madhu, the Honourable Mr. Panda, the Honourable Mr. Taves, the Honourable Mr. Nally, the Honourable Mr. Grecian, Mr. Amory, the Honourable Mr. Copping, Mr. Yassine, the Honourable Mr. Nicolaides, Mr. Scow, the Honourable Ms. Schultz, Mr. Newdorf, Ms. Armstrong-Homenuk, Ms. Lovely, Mr. Nixon, Ms. Furr, Ms. Isaac, Mr. Horner, Mr. Rutherford, Mr. Tour, Mr. Sigurdsson, Mr. Jones, Mr. Van Dyken, Mr. Hanson, Mr. Smith, Mr. Long, Honourable Mrs. Ahir.
All those members opposed in the chamber, please rise and be counted.
Mr. Sabir, Mr. Shepherd, Mr. Diol, Mr. Billis, Mr. Agan, Member Carson, Ms. Goring, Ms. Sweet.
Thank you, honourable members. We will now do a roll call vote alphabetically by last name for those members who are participating remotely. When you hear your name, please unmute your mic and state your vote loudly and clearly, either for or against the motion for third reading. Once you finish voting, please remute your mic. Remember to leave your cameras on for the duration of the vote, and all those members in the chamber, please remain seated.
Ms. Glasgow.
In favor.
Ms. Goodridge. Mr. Godfrey. Mr. Orr.
In favor.
Thank you. If you did not hear your name, please unmute your mic now and identify yourself to be recognized to vote.
Hi, sorry. Rural internet.
We're back.
In favor.
And for clarity, that was MLA Goodridge. In favor. Are there any others? Hearing none.
Mr. Speaker, for the motion, clearly 30. I oppose to the motion 8.
That motion for third reading is carried and so ordered.
Bill 67, Skilled Trades and Apprenticeship Education Act, is now read a third time.
I see the Honourable Deputy Government House Leader has risen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It has been a good week, a long week, but we've accomplished a lot, and so I move that the Assembly be adjourned until 1:30 p.m. Monday, June 14th, 2021.
Thank you, Honourable Associate Minister. All those members in favour of the motion as moved by the Honourable Deputy Government House Leader, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed, please say no. That is carried and so ordered. The Assembly now stands adjourned until Monday afternoon at 1:30 p.m.